Thank you very much. Tell me when my screen is visible.
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Okay. Thank you so much. And I was quite wondering how Dr. Deepa is awake, because 3:30, even in the afternoon, people sleep in India, not just in the morning. So it's been very interesting to listen to her. So my talk is going to be about green low carbon development challenges. And I'm going to start off by looking at only 4 things essentially. First is defining the low carbon economy, especially for India. What could be the goals for a low carbon economy? How are we going towards a low carbon economy? What are the things we need to have in place? What are the systems, infrastructure, and stuff like that? And finally, align. Just give me a second. Yeah. So that would comprise of my session. So defining, if you look at the textbook definition of low carbon economy, it simply says that an economy that causes lower levels of GHG emissions than the current economy. Now we know for sure that for India, such a very simplistic definition is not going to take us to the kind of goals that we are envisioning for the country in the next decade or so. So we really need to redefine the way the low carbon economy is going to work for India and is going to support India in its growth. First and foremost is economic growth. And I don't think there's any disagreement that economic growth is important. We need the tax collections. We need to develop infrastructure. There's a whole lot of India which does not have the basic infrastructure, access to education, healthcare, so on and so forth. And that's going to come from the taxes, which are going to come from economic growth. So economic growth, which leads to well-being, is the kind of growth which we are going to look at. Reduction in greenhouse gas emissions is something which we have committed and which is extremely important as our entity on this planet. The third thing is the conservation of natural capital, which is getting scarcer and scarcer, the non-renewable resources especially. Some of the minerals have completely exhausted in our mines, and things like that. The fourth point is increasing the sequestration capacity of the country. And there's a lot of talk about forestation and forest cover, but there are other ways to look at increasing the sequestration capacity. And finally, and the fifth most important thing is about the job growth, which is today what is quite lacking. And the United Nations data as well as the World Bank data shows that there is jobless growth right now happening in many countries, including India, which means the economy is growing, but the jobs are not growing in the proportion that we would like to. So how do we get to these 4 goals, and what is the way to look at that? The United Nations and the World Bank in 2011 had talked about decoupling economic growth. And I'm going to take that narrative ahead and place it squarely upon the Indian economy. So what is essentially decoupling of economic growth? Decoupling economic growth from 2 very important things. One is natural resource consumption, which is in this parlance is called as resource decoupled growth. And the second is the impact decoupled growth, which means the environmental impacts, the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide emissions, the loss of biodiversity, deforestation, over extraction, or so on and so forth. So these are the 2 decouplers that we need to look at for the economic growth, which will lead us to the goals which we just saw in the earlier slide. How do we go about it? Let's first talk about resource decoupled growth. There are 3 very important pathways towards resource decoupled growth. The first one is, of course, raising the value add of per use of the resource, which is in shorthand, you can say it's resource efficiency. And we know for sure that India is not really the most efficient in terms of resource use. The second one is about raising the number of times value is added to a particular resource, which implies a circularity in the economy. So you take a resource and put it through multiple value addition cycles, and that increases the GDP as well as reduces the demand on new resources. And the third very important thing is raising the renewable economy. And the most significant in-your-face renewable economy for India is the agrarian economy. So I'm going to superimpose these things on the Indian subcontinent and what it means for India. We all know that India is really low in terms of resource productivity, in terms of resource productivity in the compared to the world averages. And we have energy losses, we have irrigation water which is used in abundance. Our water, agrarian water, irrigation water is not the most efficient in the country. Raising the value add per resource is not very difficult. We can measure it by resource, we can measure it by sector, we can measure it by economic process or the life cycle. All of these things can contribute towards measuring this. When we are talking about value addition, it's not just in the production process, but right from mining, converting, distribution, production, the entire value chain of the mineral is to the final product and at the discard end of life cycle. Increasing the value added per product in terms of higher value. So, for example, Dr. Mashelkar always gives this example of zirconium in India. So, India exports raw zirconium at a very cheap price and imports stabilized zirconium at a very high price. Now, if we were able to add that value in the Indian economy, that would contribute to the GDP. There are various methods of increasing the value add per resource consumption. So, for example, IT companies, when they move from services to products, they increase the profitability, they increase their revenues, while not increasing their resource use in the same proportion. The national resource efficiency policy is something which the Indian government came up in 2019. Unfortunately, it's still on the table. It's not yet taken up for that. And that is something which is important. Import dependence, we are 100% dependent upon a lot of minerals. And that needs to come back into the economy. They are all discarded at the end of the life cycle. Raising the number of times the value is added, and that's quite easy to see. We have tremendous amount of electronic waste which is just lying there: tires, PET bottles, white goods, plastic, adding higher value. So, for example, today a lot of pyrolysis units have come up from plastic to fuel, but that's really at the lowest end of the value chain. Recovering polyester is something which is a little higher. Bottle reuse is something which would be the best. So increasing the number of times is something which developing products for the circular economy. Raising the renewable economy, the agrarian economy, is something which India must concentrate on. We know today that 58% of Indian citizens are in agri-related businesses, and they contribute not more than 15 to 16% to the GDP. Imagine if we are able to increase the livelihoods of these 58% from 15% to 50%, that and contribute towards growth. Agroclimatic efficiency has not been really good in Indian agriculture. In fact, we have thrown agroclimatic thinking. The renewable materials are something, again, which is that's the part of the low carbon economy which Hello. Yeah, I'm back.
Okay, sure.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's visible.
Yeah, it's visible, right? Okay. So changing the resources which are used and using resources in more environmental friendly ways. So changing resources which we are using, the obvious choice is renewable energy and alternate energy. So PV, solar, heating, wind, all of these technologies which are now commercialized and very much waiting there for India to shift onto that. The second is about alternate energies, which means urban waste to fuel, which is a huge sector for India, and that can contribute significantly to changing our resource use in the energy generation sector. Mobility is the way you're changing resource use from private transport towards a public transport, mass transport. Unfortunately, India has lagged behind in the metro narrative, in the public transport, BRTS narrative, all of that. And it's time that we take rapid strides in this. Using resources in more environmental friendly ways. So for example, again, like I said earlier, changing the processes, disincentivizing negative externality, something which really needs to come up in the Indian context. Environmental friendly products for household consumption. uh, the most significant amount of pollution in Indian rivers is coming from domestic household chemicals, which is the shampoos and soaps and stuff like that. Burning biomass is absolutely not adding to the economy, it's adding to the emissions. If we are able to convert a significant amount of biomass into fuel, that is going to help the economy. And there are technologies which are commercialized here. Increasing sequestration capacities, again, there are two pathways there, the natural sequestration and the artificial sequestration. So natural sequestration, the three most important ways is above ground, which is forest cover, grasslands, wetlands, and below the ground. Artificial sequestration is carbon capture, utilization, storage, and ocean sequestration. I'm going to quickly move on to aligning the policies because of paucity of time. So this is how a low carbon economy for India should actually look like. We have economic growth and well-being going up, employment actually following the economic growth, resource use and emissions and impact declining. For this to happen, we need some alignment with the policies. The first and most important thing is the national resource efficiency policy, and the board has to be mainstreamed into the economy now. This is in the waiting for a very long time. For the last 3 years, the decision has not been taken, but there is a very important sectoral resource efficiency strategy in that, which needs to, our construction sector, infrastructure sector, cement sector, all of these have a huge potential to reduce their resource consumption for decoupling. Investment in energy distribution infrastructure, one of the speakers earlier said, we have a huge transmission losses in the large scale grids which we have today. Microgrids technology enabled, for example, deep minds of Google is using technology, artificial intelligence to predict faults and actually improve the energy efficiency in data centers in the US. Similar technologies can very well be used in the smart city programs. Privatization of renewable energy, the ease of doing business in renewable energy is not really the best in India. The incentives need to be really, really tweaked to get to the right one. Tax regimes to promote circularity. At this point of time, we do not have any tax regimes which are actually promoting circularity. We don't have any kind of recycling infrastructure. It's very, very sporadic, it's very fragmented in the country and not accessible. Green economic zones, something which the country needs to look at. We have had SEZs for a very long time. The success has been mixed with SEZ, but green economic zones are zones which can promote circularity, can promote green businesses, startups, and so on and so forth. The agrarian market, if we need to increase the GDP sectoral contribution of agriculture from 15 to 50, then there has to be some strong policy changes in this. Most important are the agrarian infrastructure, access to energy, access to water, and markets. Access to markets also is not equitable in India. MSP, for example, the minimum support price, we need to use it as an incentive for appropriate cropping rather than just looking at the remuneration to the farmers. Removing agro market imperfections. Now, it's a no-brainer that the APMCs, the agro marketing produced companies, have several market imperfections. There's hardly any price discovery. There can be buyer collusion. They're very far away from most places in India, so on and so forth. And that needs to be structurally changed right now. Mass transport infrastructure is something which is lacking in many cities and urban places, and that can improve the efficiencies, the emissions to a large extent. EPR, take back laws, all of these are just simply waiting there on the fence to be taken up. We really need to. Natural farming, soil carbon, there's a huge potential to store carbon in the soil. Natural farming is one of the ways towards moving to soil as a storage and sequestration. But we need to build capacity. There is no capacity. There are no capabilities within farmers, within within the supply chain, within producers of inputs, and there is hardly any infrastructure. The natural farming crops are going to be more expensive in terms of inputs, but they don't get more prices at the moment. We need to have some a separate market mechanism where they can get higher prices. The buyers need to discover what they are buying. If that doesn't happen, they are not going to be willing to pay a higher price, and then the economy, the agrarian economy, is not going to move up. And finally, green entrepreneurship. That, I think, is a very strong enabler. We have a lot of technologies which can really be put forth and utilized for social benefit and for environmental benefit. At this point of time, we are promoting entrepreneurship in technology development, but it is not directly towards a social benefit or to fill up the gap which is required for the low carbon economy. And that, I think, would be a key enabler for a country like India, where the youth have got tremendous innovative capabilities and access to technologies, education. All the other factors are quite in place. Of course, there is a mismatch in the factor allocation between urban and rural markets, but that needs to be addressed separately. And I would, with that, I would like to stop here and thank PIC, Dr. Malik, and the entire team for allowing me to make this presentation. Thank you.